Concerts can be a lot of fun, but they don't always go so well. From a tsunami destroying the stage and sweeping the band away, to a massive pyrotechnics malfunction that changed the fire code in the United States forever, there have been some crazy concert disasters throughout music history. So today we're going to look into some of the craziest ones, starting off with the Station Club fire. On February 20th in 2003, what was supposed to be a fun night out took a turn for the worse. The American rock band Great White was set to perform at a venue in Rhode Island called the Station, a building which was originally built in 1946 as a gin mill, then turned into a bar and grill, and later on again converted into a nightclub. But after some major mistakes in planning, tragedy struck, and it resulted in an accident so deadly that it changed the laws across the country forever. As the show was about to begin, 462 fans gathered with excitement before the stage, and at around 11:07 p.m., Great White's lead singer Jack Russell appeared. 13 seconds later, as part of the band's opening pyrotechnics, a fountain of sparks sprayed behind Russell. 2 streams fired straight up and 2 went outward. Everything appeared to be going as planned, with Great White starting to play their first song, Desert Moon. However, 10 seconds in, fans began to notice flames spreading behind the band, and 9 seconds after that, the fire rapidly spread up to the ceiling. Since Great White kept playing, they didn't know that there was a big fire behind them, so fans kind of just thought that it was part of the performance. But as the fire spread uncontained, it became clear that it was by no means part of the show, and caused immediate panic, with the fire alarms beginning to go off. This is when Russell calmly remarked into the microphone, "Wow, that's not good." Concert goers rushed to find exits, which quickly became difficult as smoke was filling the building and nobody could see. A large portion of attendees tried to go through the main entrance, but were slowed from the building's bottleneck design. And apart from the side exit, which was blocked by bouncers, the other 2 were either behind closed doors or too hard to find thanks to all of the smoke. While some windows were operable for escape, many others were barred off. In less than 90 seconds, the nightclub's conditions were considered deadly, leaving a very short amount of time for people to escape. And 6 minutes after the fire started, the entire building was engulfed, eventually burning completely to the ground. Of the 275 people who attempted to escape using the front entrance, only the first 90 managed to evacuate. Within 60 seconds of ignition, someone called 911 and the first fire truck arrived at 11:13, just minutes after the fire started. But unfortunately, it was too late. Hundreds of firefighters responded to the fire, and the inn across the street was used as a temporary shelter for burn victims and a command center for first responders. By 1:30 in the morning, all the affected individuals had been transported to the nearby hospital, which actually reached capacity because of the fire. As a result, 100 attendees died, including the band's guitarist, 2 members of the opener, the show's DJ, and 4 employees of the station. 230 were injured, and 132 escaped uninjured, making this the deadliest firework incident in the United States history. But besides the obvious origin of the fire, how did it get out of control so quickly, and what made this situation as bad as it was? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. First is that Great White's manager blatantly ignored the safety precautions of the station's owner. While it had been part of the band's tour structure to use pyrotechnics throughout their show, this was clearly a risky move at an indoor venue, and one which they had already been denied permission to use but still went through with at multiple venues. The owner even knew of this tradition and directly said no pyrotechnics, but Great White's manager went through with it anyway. Which brings us to the second mistake. Inside the club, as part of the renovations installed by the owners, was acoustic foam to increase the sound quality of the old building and insulate sound due to noise complaints. But a major flaw of this foam was its high flammability. Along with being flammable, the foam also has tons of ridges which allowed for sparks to land and sit, eventually catching fire. However, even with these 2 major factors, it still seems like a crisis of this scale could have been avoided. Which brings us to the third issue, the station's long list of fire code risks. Since the building was so old, the grandfather clause stated that if maintained in the same condition, it may be used under previous safety assessment. So for the station, this meant as a bar and grill, the building could hold 258 people. But since it was being operated as a music venue with a majority of the people standing in close proximity of each other, under the assembly building law, 404 were allowed. However, even considering the stretched guidelines, on the night of the incident, 462 people were in attendance, which is 58 people over an already risky assessment. To make things worse, as another part of the grandfather clause, the building had no sprinklers or nearby fire extinguishers, which in later held NSIT simulations on the event would have changed the outcome drastically, potentially putting out the fire before a single life was lost. And apparently the fire marshal even warned this building multiple times. The tragedy of the Station Club fire quickly became national news, and the Rhode Island governor declared a state of emergency. Multiple investigations launched which discovered the multiple slip-ups we discussed earlier, and this resulted in a few people being held accountable. Both owners of the club were indicted, as well as the manager of Great White. Great White's tour manager, Daniel Bichel, was mainly in trouble for outright ignoring the order against pyrotechnics. Daniel eventually pled guilty against his lawyer's advice to 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter in 2006 and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He said the reason he pled guilty was in an effort to bring peace. I want this to be over with. But he was eventually released in 2008 after some of the families of the victims expressed support for his parole. Jeffrey and Michael Derderian, the club owners, pled no contest and avoided a trial. Michael got the same sentence as Daniel and was released from prison in 2009, while Jeffrey received a sentence of 500 hours of community service. Both of them were also fined $1 million for failing to have workers' compensation insurance for their employees. In a crazy, ironic twist, the entire tragic event was actually caught on camera by a news cameraman that the owner invited out. Jeff had actually started recently as a reporter as well and was going to do a piece on club safety, which is why he invited the cameraman out to his show for this piece on club safety, which is just insane to think about. In June, following the Station Club fire, the Comprehensive Fire Safety Act of 2003 was introduced, addressing critical issues like grandfathering, amongst others. This act and similar ones began in Rhode Island and eventually swept across the entire nation. By May of 2017, at the site where the station once stood, Station Fire Memorial Park was opened as a permanent memorial to the fire victims. The Station Club fire was a massive tragedy and changed fire codes nationwide, but it seemed avoidable if protocol was followed. However, the band members of Seventeen never could have imagined that a tsunami was about to destroy their concert. On December 22nd in 2018, tragedy struck during a company's end-of-the-year family party, hosting popular Indonesian band Seventeen. Taking place on the peaceful beach of a Java resort, the scene rapidly became disastrous as unforeseen weather developed. Late in the evening on a Saturday, Indonesia's state-run electric company PLN hosted a family gathering to celebrate 200 of their employees and their loved ones. As part of the large celebration, they were able to secure a private concert on the beach from a band called 17. As the night went on, all was going well, and everyone was super excited for 17's performance. However, just 2 songs into their set, everything took a turn for the worse. At 9:30 p.m., out of nowhere with zero warning, the stage, which had its back facing the sea, was consumed by water. A massive wave had come, destroying the stage and flooding the entire beachside venue with enormous force. Entire families, as well as most of the infrastructure making up the event, were swept away in an instant. As a result of the 2018 Sunda Strait tsunami, the resort party, which took place on the western tip of Java, faced severe casualties. 29 PLN employees and their relatives were killed, and 13 went missing. On top of this, all of 17's band members were swept away during the chaos. Both bassist Bani Perbani and road manager Oki Wijaya were declared dead on the scene. The bodies of the guitarist Sikumbang, drummer Darmawan, crew member Ujang Rustam, and lead vocalist Rifian's wife, actress and TV personality Dylan Sahara were all found later on, leaving Rifian Fajarsha as the band's lone survivor. The reason this tsunami occurred was due to a large landslide which happened on Anak Krakatoa, which was a nearby volcano. When the major landslide collapsed into Anak Krakatoa's caldera, a large tsunami formed and struck a large part of Indonesia's coastal region. The tsunami came with little to no warning at nighttime during the nation's Christmas and New Year holiday season, which contributed to the large loss of life. With 426 deaths, the tsunami was the deadliest volcanic tsunami in Indonesia since the 1883 Krakatoa tsunami. Following the tsunami, while search parties were still looking for members of the band, Rifian put out emotional, heartfelt posts hoping for the return of those still lost. As well as these hopeful posts, he also put out a heartbreaking birthday wish to his wife, whose birthday was just one day after everything went down. Rifian still carries the band's name in his solo career as a tribute to the members who lost their lives. In remembrance of the tragic event, a documentary was put together using 55 hours of log footage shot prior to the show that was found on the late drummer's camera. Following the tsunami, Indonesian authorities installed multiple emergency early warning systems in tsunami-prone areas, all in hopes to prevent future tragedies like this one. And while this tragedy was a complete surprise that no one could have seen coming, it isn't too shocking that when the Rolling Stones hired Hell's Angels, a biker gang, as their security, things went south. On December 6, 1969, 300,000 fans gathered at the Altamont Raceway in California for what was supposed to be the Woodstock of the West Coast. However, things didn't quite go that way, and the event instead was remembered for much darker reasons. Instead of a peaceful concert for hundreds of thousands to enjoy, the chaotic turn of events ended with multiple deaths and overwhelming violence. In 1969, the Rolling Stones were on their longest US tour up to that point, but there was a problem. Because of how popular they were, the ticket prices were super high and they were getting tons of complaints. In response to this, the Stones teamed up with a bunch of other big artists at that time, including the Grateful Dead, amongst others, for a free concert. The whole point was basically to recreate Woodstock, which had happened earlier that year. However, while the Woodstock Music Festival had months to organize the complexities of a concert to that scale, the Rolling Stones just had weeks. In this stretch, the venue changed multiple times due to various problems, and these problems, in reflection, should have been red flags. Since the crew had to move their setup more than once, this meant that important features like bathrooms and medical tents were overlooked, and also because the plans for the show were designed for the first venue, issues with the concert layout began to arise as well. But the biggest problem that came up was the issue of security. For some reason, both the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane pushed for the use of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, which was basically an outlaw gang who also could be used at the time as cheap security for the scrambling event organizers. Both of these bands had previously used the Angels for security at performances without incident, but this move ended up being a pivotal mistake. As fans started arriving on the day of the show, preparations weren't nearly complete. The entire setup looked unprofessional, from speakers placed randomly to hazardous light scaffolding. As the day went on, fans grew more and more rowdy with a thick tension brewing in the air. In response to rabid fans pushing closer, the Angels immediately turned to violence using an array of random objects like pool cues and motorcycle chains to beat the crowd into submission. The power struggle continued and hit a new high when Santana was forced to stop performing after attendees rushed the stage and caused a fight, but the violence did not stop there. Things seemed to be calming down for a bit, but then Denise Jukes, lead singer of the Ace of Cups, who was also 6 months pregnant, was hit in the head by an empty beer bottle thrown from the crowd. Then, when Jefferson Airplane started, fans knocked over a Hells Angels bike, which inevitably led to more chaos. Things got so bad that when the lead singer of Jefferson Airplane attempted to stop the violence, he ended up getting knocked out by a Hells Angel. This was the same group that requested them as security, by the way. And if this wasn't enough, when Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young took the stage, they were also forced to stop after the band's singer was stabbed by an angel in the leg with a bicycle spoke. After the second incident of a band member facing violence, the Grateful Dead made the rational decision to leave and forgo their performance entirely. But this also caused some issues for fans as the stage was left empty for 2 hours with the organizers trying to figure out how to fix it. And by the time the Rolling Stones finally came out, lead singer Mick Jagger was punched in the face by an attendee who apparently yelled, "I hate you." 3 songs in, Mick Jagger paused and begged both the Hells Angels and the crowd of fans to calm down, but his request fell on deaf ears and the result was deadly. During the Stones set, a young fan named Meredith Hunter, who was 18 years old, attempted to climb a speaker box next to the stage in order to get a better view. In retaliation, the Angels ripped him from the speaker and viciously beat him. In self-defense, Meredith pulled out his gun, but the sight of the firearm only set off the Angels further, and in response to that, 21-year-old Hells Angel Alan Passaro pulled a blade and stabbed Meredith in the back multiple times, and within minutes, the young fan was pronounced dead on the scene. However, there are some conflicting stories on how this exactly went down, with some alleging that Meredith sought to harm a member of the Stones with his gun, but Meredith was not the only person to lose a life at this event. 2 more attendees were killed in hit and runs after the show, and another drowned in a ditch while high on acid. On top of the deaths included numerous car thefts, property damage, and hundreds of injuries. Alan Passaro, the Hells Angel that murdered Meredith, was eventually arrested and charged, but after the trial he ended up getting off claiming self-defense. This whole disaster was eventually turned into a documentary film titled Gimme Shelter. In the end, this was such a disaster that the event was labeled Rock and Roll's all-time worst day, December 6th, a day when everything went perfectly wrong. And while that disaster could have easily been avoided, this next one is something that tends to happen often when events are poorly planned. On December 3rd, 1979, The Who was set to play in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Riverfront Coliseum. The highly anticipated event sold over 18,000 tickets, with seating for general admission being first come, first serve. When the floodgates opened, thousands of attendees hoping to get a good seat poured in. But before The Who had even made it on stage, tragedy had already struck, with multiple fans losing their lives. At the time of the disaster, The Who was on their US leg of the worldwide tour. Similar to the Rolling Stones, their high popularity meant that tickets sold out quick. And since the first come, first served seating arrangements basically incentivized a competitive nature, fans weren't afraid to get a bit too rowdy, even if this meant creating multiple safety hazards. Trouble started brewing when a local radio station claimed to a bunch of fans that the gates would open at 3 p.m. Because of this, a ton of people got there early thinking the doors were about to open. Similar to a tailgate for a baseball game, they were drinking and in general pretty much just partying. And as hours went on, the crowd grew to thousands. At one point, it even prompted police to come through and try to manage the horde's energy, which was growing to a noticeably dangerous level. However, when the clock struck 3, the gates stayed closed, and this remained the case for another 4 hours in the frigid Midwest. Some fans had been out in the cold for almost 6 hours by now, many of which were drinking during the wait. The problem was that multiple entrances were not used. All fans were going to be let in through only 2 doors, which seems like quite the bottleneck when there's thousands of fans. Hours after people were told to arrive, event organizers still weren't ready. And when some members of the people outside heard the Who's last sound check, the energy reached another level. Word spread like a wildfire, and when it hit the back of the crowd, they believed the show had already started, so they began pushing, anxious to get in. However, in reality, the show had not begun, and they didn't even open the main doors. But 2 doors did end up opening on the right side, which, as you can imagine, turned into a disaster. Thousands of fans began to pour in through just 2 doors. Staff checking tickets tried to maintain the chaos, but for around half an hour, the crowd pushed in with massive force. At this point, multiple fans had fallen to the ground, but since the crowd was packed so tight, nobody noticed. The officers present were helpless, and for event staff, little was known about the dangerous conditions outside until it was too late. If you've ever been to a giant concert or a music festival, you know how tight and hot these spaces can get and how just crammed in you are with all these people, which can turn dangerous very quick. When most of the fans were allowed in, the casualties were revealed, surrounded by thousands of bloody footprints. And in the end, it resulted in the tragic death of 11 concert goers who were crushed in the giant crowd. When the event organizers evaluated their options, against fire officials' advisement in a somewhat dark decision, they decided that the show must go on. This was mostly because of their fear that canceling could cause even more deaths of a similar nature. During the show, the bodies of fans ranging from 15 to 27 years old were removed, and others who were seriously injured were rushed to the hospital. The Who were not told about what happened until after the show, and when they found out, they were extremely distraught. Years later, the guitarist Pete Townsend said, "I went through 2 phases. One was, of course, tremendous upset and concern, but the other was incredible anger that we had been performing while this was going on. It was to the point where they thought about canceling the rest of their tour." Many publications were pretty unsympathetic, blaming the crowd full of the alleged drug and alcohol abusers. However, after further investigation, it became extremely obvious that the disaster occurred in major part because of the first come first served seating, as well as overall poor planning. And like in the station fire, many previous warning signs at the venue were ignored. Lots of debate followed for who was truly to blame, and in the end, the city not only banned festival seating for many years, but also limited ticket sales to ensure safer conditions. In a class action lawsuit filed by the deceased victims' families, around $150,000, which is about $450 today, was awarded, and among the 26 injured, $750,000 was divided. And while this was due to eager fans and a poor venue design, this next disaster was all thanks to one crazy fan. On December 8th, 2004, the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, hosted the heavy metal band Damageplan. The night was supposed to be a concert featuring some of the genre's biggest legends, like Pantera's founding Abbott brothers, Vinnie Paul and dimebag Darrell. But things took a dark turn when an attendee rushed the stage and multiple shots were fired. In 2003, the band Pantera split up due to a conflict between members, specifically revolving around lacking respect for the Abbott brothers. Following the split, the brothers quickly started their own band called Damageplan. While the group may not have reached the same levels of success as their former group, they were successful enough to go on tour. On April 8th, a 25-year-old Pantera fan named Nathan Gale interrupted their show in Cincinnati when he jumped on the stage and started wrecking their other stage equipment. This brief moment resulted in around $2,000 worth of damage and ended with police arresting Gale for criminal endangerment and destruction of property. However, Damageplan didn't want to press charges because they didn't want to go back to Cincinnati for court. Months went by and the band was unfazed by the incident, but on the second to last show of their tour, tragedy struck. While the openers were playing, the club manager and other concert goers noticed Nathan Gale loitering in the parking lot, and they asked why he was outside, to which he responded, "I don't want to see no shitty local bands. I'm gonna wait for Damageplan." At around 10 p.m. when Damageplan took the stage, Gale climbed a 6-foot wooden fence and entered through a patio door. During the opening song, dressed in a hockey jersey and a hoodie, he rushed the stage and drew his gun. He moved towards dimebag Darrell and fired 4 times at point blank range, hitting him 3 times in the head and once in the hand. And at the same time, attendees did not realize that a shooting had taken place, with the security guard stating, "People were pumping their fists thinking it was a hoax." After shooting Darrell, Gale began firing on others, beginning with the tour manager Chris Paluska, who was shot once in the chest before damage plan security chief Jeffrey Mayhem Thompson tackled Gale from behind. In the struggle, Mayhem was fatally shot in the chest, back, and upper thigh. Nathan Bray, a damage plan fan, leapt onto the stage and was fatally shot in the chest while attempting to resuscitate Darrell and Thompson. Aaron Hulk, an El Rosa Villa employee and former Marine, charged Gale while he was reloading, but he was mortally wounded by 6 shots. Travis Burnett, a member of the opener's road crew, attempted to disarm Gale but was grazed by a bullet and then fled the scene when more shots were aimed at his head. Then drum technician John Cat Brooks attempted to subdue Gale but was shot twice in the leg and taken as a hostage. Less than 3 minutes later, Officer James arrived on scene in response to a 911 call. He entered the club through a backstage door and shot Gale once in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun, killing him instantly. At the time of his death, Gale had a half-full magazine in his gun and another 30 rounds of ammo on him. During the attack, he fired a total of 15 rounds. And immediately following the chaos, fans attempted to perform CPR on Gale's victims, but tragically the injuries were too severe. The motive for the shooting is still kind of unknown, but it's assumed to have a few main reasons. First of all, Gale had a drug problem. He was kicked out of his mom's house and was discharged from the military. He told his mom that he had paranoid schizophrenia, which is why they discharged him, and he never took his medication, so clearly he had a lot of problems. As a lifelong fan of heavy metal, he became obsessed with Pantera while he was in high school and remained fixated on the band even after they separated in 2003. Gale's former friend told reporters that he'd shown up with Pantera lyrics that he claimed were his own. Basically, he was saying that Pantera stole his lyrics and that they were attempting to steal his identity. Many of Gale's friends began to distance themselves as he became increasingly erratic. Once he even told his former friend that God was asking him to kill Marilyn Manson. Others noticed that he would talk and laugh to himself. He'd pretend to hold an imaginary dog, and that he would bother patrons at the tattoo parlor across the street from his apartment. After the shooting, police officers found 2 handwritten notes inside the apartment. One read, "You'll see come alive. I'll take your life and make it mine. This is my life. I'm gone." The other read, "You'll see the sky fall. I'll make pigs fly. Come on and give me some. Come on, give me some. Do it and die. Do it and die." After the shooting, it was speculated that Gale had been motivated by Pantera's disbandment, with the initial reports claiming that he had shouted, "You broke up Pantera," or "This is for breaking up Pantera," before opening fire. Officer James was given a number of awards for his actions, and even Gale's mother referred to him as a hero, telling reporters, "I give that man credit. You'll never know how many lives he saved." Immediately after the shooting, many concert venues tightened their security standards by hiring off-duty police officers as guards and checking attendees' pockets and bags more thoroughly. Clearly, there have been a lot of tragic concert disasters, some of which were avoidable and others that were just plain tragic. If you like this video, you might also like my video about the worst festival disasters, which had some similar situations just on a larger scale. Anyways, if you enjoyed, please make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing down below. Other than that, it's been your boy Matty Balls, and I will see you guys next time.